so now we want to go through kind of a quick overview of just the controller to give you an idea of what you're looking at over here and how it relates back to the machine operation. So of course, initially, here's your display. This is kind of the typical screen that you can expect to be interfacing with when you're working on the controller. You have typically up here on the top the last loaded program that was loaded onto the machine. And that'll be displayed up at the top, and then you can manipulate the program and edit it right here as needed. Down in the lower third of the screen is essentially a menu system that you can access the different controls and different commands of the controller by going through the menus. The menus are essentially accessed by using the appropriate number that's associated with a particular function. So for instance, if I wanted to go into my offsets page, I just push number 6, and that takes me into an offsets page where I can then work on various offsets. If I want to get out of this menu system, I have a little kind of indicator, a little quick note here to tell me how to do that. It says press manual to abort. Essentially know that by pushing the manual key at any time, it will take you out of your current menu level and return you to the previous one. So your manual key is kind of your general get out of menu or escape key. There are a series of menus that you can access, and you can do that by pressing the space bar. So you press space bar for next menu. So as I push the space bar, it essentially just cycles through more options for me to access different commands on the controller. And eventually, by pressing the space bar, I can get to the command prompt, this enter next command prompt, which will allow me to type commands in directly. In general, all of these commands here that are listed that I access via the numbers can also be directly accessed just by typing in the right key sequence into the enter next command prompt. Now, as you get more comfortable using the Fidal controller, typically you'll tend to enter commands in here more than you will access commands via the menu system, just because you remember what they are and it's faster. That's your basic control interface, and then down below that is obviously the keyboard. The top row is really the major or main row of CNC modes or CNC operational modes. And we'll just walk through that real quickly. The first two keys that I'll point out here are the start and the slide hold. So start is green and slide hold is red. Essentially, that should indicate to you that by pushing this green button, you're going to be making acknowledgments to the machine, typically when it's asking for your input or asking essentially for your acknowledgement that you want it to do something. So pushing start will often start a program, allow it to move, cause motion, something like that. So when I'm pushing the start button, I need to be prepared to be watching what the machine is doing so that if there is an issue, an error made in setup, I can pause it or stop it before there's a crash. That stopping is accomplished by pushing the slide hold button. So red is go, or green is go, red is stop, essentially. Now, you'll notice that there's a green and a red button over here as well. These two series of buttons are equivalent. This red button, both do the same thing. Either can be pushed at any time. Likewise, green and green, also the same. The next mode that we have is our auto mode key. Auto mode is the mode of the controller where programs are ran from. So by pushing auto, what it will do is essentially load up the program that's currently loaded. I should say it'll shift into moving or running it. And then it drops into essentially a waiting state. So at this point, if I was to push the start button, the machine would start executing this program line by line. To get out of auto mode, so currently I don't want to run this program, to escape out of there, again, there's a little kind of indicator right here, tells me how to do that. and we already heard that a manual key is our general escape key, so I can push the manual key, get out of auto mode, and go back to the enter next command prompt. And again, cycle through my commands. Now, the manual key in and of itself is actually intended to allow you to get into a mode known as manual data input, or MDI mode. And I can do that by cycling the manual key until I enter into the MDI mode. So here I did it. I had to push it twice in that case to exit me out of the program edit mode, essentially, and then the enter next command prompt. And now I'm in manual data input mode. And this mode is where I can actually enter and execute G-code directly. So I can type various G-codes in here and then execute those on the machine and then cause motion. So I can do kind of quick setup and test out routines. To get out of manual mode, just like every other submenu, I press manual to exit out of manual mode, and it will take me back to the enter next command prompt. Single step is the next key. Single step is used in conjunction with auto mode. And essentially what it's going to do is when I am in auto mode, by pressing single step, it will allow the machine to only execute one line or one block of code at a time. And then the machine will pause and wait for me to acknowledge or tell it that I want it to move to the next line. And I do that by pressing the start button. And we'll walk through that in detail when we actually run a test program later on. All right, so we're back at the enter next command prompt. And what I want to do is talk again about essentially what's known as edit mode. So I'll hit the space bar to take me back to our main display screen here. And this is actually edit mode for our program. The current program that has loaded up here up on the top. And I can manipulate this program. I mean, I can edit the text right here directly if I need to. And the way that it's accomplished is by just interacting with the keyboard. But what I want to do is press the space bar until I get to the edit menu right here. Now, all these functions that are shown right here are actually active anytime that the program is displayed. However, this is kind of your quick key guide, your cliff notes of what the functions are that you have access to in order to edit your code. So for instance, if I needed to change a particular value in my code, I can do that by basically using these tools. So right here on line number 9, N9, we've got an X4.0 location. Let's suppose I needed to change that to 4.5 or something like that. What I'll do is take note of this little caret right up here on the top. This is currently the active line, and that's the line that I can actually interact or edit. And I want to change that to come down here to line number 9. And I'll do that just by pushing the D key for down, which is indicated right here on the screen. So I'll push D, and you'll notice that as I push D, this little caret is dropping down. And now line 9 is active. If I want to change that, I'll push C for change. And now it pops up, and now I can just type in what I want it to be. So my new value, let's say it's X4.5. I'll type that, press enter. It gives me a preview of what I typed to make sure that I'm okay with what I've done. If I like that, then I'll hit enter, and it writes it into the program, and I have changed or edited the program right there at this point. Okay. If I need to insert a line, I can use I for insert. So I can and I can type in a new code, X. Let's just go back to where we were, 4.0, and type enter, and then continue and do more lines, as many as I want. Just one line this time, and there we go. I've added line 9.1 in this case. To delete a line, you just simply press the delete key, which is right here. So I can press delete, and it gives me the option, current line, multiple lines, whatever you want to do. We'll just go ahead and delete the line that we added. So I'll say current line, and yes to confirm it, and there you go. That has been edited. So your basic editing functions are there. One of those that I'll check here for. So often we're like looking for a tool change, for instance. We might want to find a tool change in our program. So I can use the search function. Before I talk about that, though, I want to show two other things. The search function in the Fadal controller is essentially a forward-only function. It will only search from the current active line down to the bottom of the program. And so if what I'm searching for is above me, I won't find it. So it's usually a good idea when you're doing a search in the controller to make sure that your active line is at the top of the program. And you can do that simply just by pressing T for top. So I press T, it takes me to the top of the program. Likewise, if I want to get to the end of the program, I can press B for bottom, and that shoots me clear down to the end of the program. Okay, so if I want to search for a tool change, I'll press T for top, and then I'll type S for search, and then tool change is going to be an M6 command followed by a T word. So I'll just do an M. I'll search for M6 and then press enter. And sure enough, there you go. Line 4, I found an M6, changed to tool 1, and then I can see what's going on there and edit it if I need to. Another thing that is typically done on the controller is maybe I want to change my feed rates. I'm machining along. I found that my machining feeds are either too fast or too slow, and maybe I want to change all of those. So instead of having to search through and find each particular feed rate, there is a essentially search and replace function. Same sequence. I'll press T for top, and then I'll do the replace function. So R. And I can search for a particular feed rate. Let's say, let me scan down right here. I can see that here's a feed rate of 0.02 inches per minute. I actually think that's been programmed in error and probably should be 20 inches a minute or 2 inches a minute. So let's go through and search and replace all of our 0.2 feed rates. So what am I going to search for? I want to search for F 0.2. and press enter. And what do I want to replace that with? How about 2.0 instead, and hit enter. And basically what it does is start scanning through, and then it gives me the option, do I want to replace this current one? Do I want to accept the current replacement, which you can see right here, it has changed it. I can accept it, reject it, or I can replace all of them. And you have the option. So maybe I want to just step through it one by one. So I'll do one, and it jumps down to another one. There's another one, and it keeps on going until you finally get tired and decide, yeah, I'll do all of them, and press 3, and it will go through and replaces all of them, just like that. Okay, that's the bulk of the editing functions, and then there's kind of one last component in the editing function that is useful, and that is essentially graphics mode or backplotting. And this is a program verification tool. It allows me to look on the screen at the program that's loaded to give me kind of a visual indication of what it's going to do. So to enter into that, I can press G for graphics, and then I have some options here to basically see what's going on. There's two options that I typically demonstrate for the students to use, and that's Auto Draw A and C Clear Screen. Auto Draw is supposed to rescale I should rescale or rezoom your program so that it shows up correctly on the screen, but it doesn't always do it. So typically we'll say hit A for auto draw, and it'll run through, and it actually ran the program, but it ran it somewhere off over here. And so if auto draw doesn't reset your program so you can see it, then just hit the space bar and go back and press C for clear screen, and there you go. It will redraw it and then show it where you can see it. And there's what our program looks like, and gives you an opportunity to troubleshoot it as needed. Okay, there we go. Okay, so the next mode we want to go into is jog mode. And it's the mode that's going to be the most useful for machine setup, as far as loading your tools and set up your fixtures. So I'll go into jog mode by just simply pressing jog. Some basic information that's presented on the screen that's for you, useful for you. Up here on the top indicates the current location that you are physically at with your X, Y, and Z axes on the table. And then down in the bottom right here, you have basically indications of which axis is active for you to currently jog or work on. So you can see we have X is shown, there's a plus and an H. And then next to that we have kind of a little decoder ring that tells us what the H means, or the various other increments that you have. So H means 10,000ths, M 1,000ths, and L is 1/10,000th of an inch. And those are increments of motion. So while in jog mode, my manual approach generator wheel, or MPG wheel right here, is active. I'm currently active in X-axis with the large increment, and so as I rotate the wheel, I will move 10,000ths of an inch per increment, essentially, of rotation. So you can see I was moving up here. Now if you look over at the table, and I can dial this around, and you can see that I am now jogging the X-axis. If I want to switch to a different axis to move it, I have essentially two options. First, I can use the selector dial up here on the controller and switch this from X location to Y location. And when I do that, you'll note that the Y indication on the screen, or the axis indication on the screen, changes to Y. And now the Y axis is active. And again, I'm moving in 10,000ths of an inch increments. And of course, finally, Z allows me to do the same thing for the Z axis, like so. Okay, the pulse generator wheel allows me to move both positive and negative depending on which direction I'm rotating it. So clockwise rotation, is indicated here by the plus, means that I'm going to move in the positive direction for that axis. And then counterclockwise rotation is going to be the negative direction. The next thing that we have control of essentially is the increment of motion. So currently we are on H, 10,000ths, and we've got our little indicator dial right here that you can see is pointing at 10,000ths. And I can switch that. If I want to move at a finer increment, I can switch it to 1,000th of an inch. We've changed now to the M, so M is equal to 1,000ths. And as I dial this, we should see motion on the third place decimal instead of the second place decimal. So there we are, moving in Z 1,000th of an inch increment at a time, which much slower. Okay, and then finally, our smallest increment, our finest increment, is 1/10,000th of an inch in L, and that's going to be our fourth decimal place increment. So you can see every time I rotate the MPG wheel, I'm getting 1/10,000th of an inch change in direction. So that is how I can manipulate the axes using the selector switches. I can also do it directly using the keyboard, and you have a few features here that are kind of beneficial. If I want to change back to a different axis to move, I can do that directly on the keyboard just by pushing the letter indicating the axis that I want. So for X, I just push X. You notice it changes right there. And if I want to change it to my large increment, I can push the H, and then now I'm back to moving the X axis and the hand wheel is active. Additionally, I can take advantage of two other features of this controller. An incremental jog and a continuous jog. And those are essentially achieved by either pushing the jog button once or pushing and holding the jog button continuously. So if I would just want to incrementally change where I'm at in X, I can just hit the jog button one time, and you'll notice that I have changed by my increment size in the direction that I'm currently at. So I have X, I have the plus key, and if I push the jog button, I move positive 1/10,000th of an inch. If I want to go negative, then I just hit the minus key here on the keyboard. The indicator should change to minus, and if I hit the jog button once, now I'm stepping down or moving in the negative direction. Likewise, I can change my increment, so if I want to move at the 1,000th inch increment, push M, and then same thing. Now I'm moving in the thousandths place. And of course, L for 1/10,000ths, and there you go. So that's incremental jog mode, and that's very useful for doing things like touching off your tools, maybe using an edge finder to find the edge of your part. It allows you to just very finely sneak up on an edge with a tool and touch it off. Okay, how about continuous jog? Let's demonstrate that. So I'm going to switch this back to my large increment in X, and yeah, we'll go in the minus direction. Now, if you look at the table, when I push and hold the jog button, you'll see that the table basically moves continuously. So this allows me to position my part or fixture around underneath the spindle relatively quickly. And again, I can change the direction simply by pushing the plus or minus keys. One other thing to note that is advantageous at this point is also this dial right above our axes and increment selector switches. We have two other dials. These are known as our override switches. We have one for feed rate and we have one for spindle speed. And these are essentially always active, meaning right now, if I was to reduce the feed rate override, it would affect the rate that I am traversing the current axes with my continuous jog mode. So again, if I push the continuous jog button and hold it down and then dial down the feed rate override, you'll notice that the rate the table moves slows actually to the point of stopping when I take it all the way to the bottom. And I'm still pushing and holding the jog key right now. And I can dial it back up and change it like so. So that guy is always active, and that is sometimes useful in jog mode for doing maybe some initial cleaning. Oftentimes you might put a face mill or something in the spindle and you need to clean off the top of the stock that you might have loaded in the vise, and so you can go into jog mode, turn on the spindle, and then use your continuous jog in conjunction with your feed override to give you an appropriate feed rate for doing that without having to really program anything. It's kind of a useful tool. Okay, let's talk about the spindle on and off at this point as well. So over here on the keyboard, which is the last button on the top, is our spindle on-off button, and it's red so that you know that that's a dangerous situation right there. You want to make sure that you know that you want to turn the spindle on before you do it. You don't want to inadvertently push this button. Now, there's also kind of a safety feature that's built into this controller to ensure that you don't turn on the spindle before you absolutely want to. So if I just push the spindle on-off button right now, nothing happens. The spindle does not come on. But if I want to actually turn the spindle on, then I can push and hold the shift key and then press the spindle on-off button. And then there we go. Spindle RPM is shown here. And so even still in jog mode, we have indication of spindle RPM, and then hopefully you can see that we are spinning the spindle. Now, and then again, override is active, so I can change my RPM, higher or lower, right there directly using the override key. Now, the thing to note, the value that it is spinning, or the RPM that it's spinning, is going to be based upon whatever was programmed last. So we did not run a program or go in MDI mode and set what spindle speed we wanted to run at in this particular case. So whatever program was run before was programmed to run around, probably around 1500 RPM, and we were just dialed down a little bit from there. So that's why the spindle is running at that speed. In order to turn it off, all I have to simply do is push the spindle off button, and then it'll stop spinning in the machine. Okay, that's the basics of jog mode. And again, to get out of jog mode, I can just push manual, and that will take me back out to the main screen. And here we are again, our program, and we can cycle through our different options. Okay, we have a couple other things to go over here remaining on the controller. Of course, the emergency stop. Anytime that you need to stop the machine because something unplanned is happening, you can hit this E-stop button, and you will not damage the machine by doing it. Now, this is not the preferred method for pausing a program or stopping a setup routine, but if there is a situation arises where you need to stop both the spindle and axis motion, you can push this button and you won't damage the machine. So I'll go ahead and just do it. I'm going to push the E-stop at this point just to demonstrate what happens. So the controller reads that and drops you essentially into the emergency stop mode, and you can see it gives you some indications about what's happened. So emergency stop, take appropriate action, blah, 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 blah. And then it gives you the key information I want you to key in on is this right here. This is essentially how to reset after pushing and pressing the emergency stop. So press the jog key to reset essentially the axis drivers. Recognize when I push the E-stop, it will latch itself in, meaning once I pushed it, it's going to stay in and latched in and keep the controller in emergency stop mode until I release it. And that's just to ensure that everything is safe on the machine and you as the operator have determined it's okay to proceed from that point. So, you know, if I had crashed the machine, maybe I've buried the tool into my part or something like that. I want to make sure that everything is all safe before I release the E-stop and then start moving things around again. So let's walk through how to release the E-stop then. So what I'll do is just simply rotate it, and that's why there's these little arrows painted on the dial for the E-stop. Rotate it, and then it pops out, and that releases it. And once it's released, then I need to go into jog mode in order to reset from the emergency stop. So first thing, press any key to clear out of this screen, and then I'm going to go into jog mode. I'll press jog, and what you'll see is that it will go in and it will reset some axis drivers. Here we go. Wait a couple seconds, goes in and does a reset, and at this point then you're ready to continue and take whatever appropriate action you might need to for your particular situation. All right, now we have our rapid travel override on this machine. So this is similar to a feed rate override, except this applies directly to rapid travel motion or G0 command motion inside the G code. So essentially is going to limit how fast the machine moves at its rapid travel rates. And we can be anywhere from 100% of machine rapid travel, so this is going to be essentially as fast as this machine has been designed and built to go by the manufacturer. We can operate at that speed, 50% of that speed, or 25% of that speed. Students that are watching this for the demo, you guys should be operating in the 25% to start, and then maybe up to 50% when you get a little bit more comfortable. I don't want you operating 100% rapid travel until you've got, you know, some sufficient amount of time on the machine to be able to react. Essentially, what this selection is going to do is reduce the amount of reaction time that you as an operator will have to essentially push the slide hold button to stop it if the machine starts going in a direction or starts doing something unanticipated that you don't want it to do. So you want to give yourself as much time as possible to be able to react, to hit your slide hold buttons either here or here in order to pause the machine. So I'm gonna highly recommend require that students start out at 25% of rapid travel. All right, and then up here on the top, we have essentially just kind of some option switches and some controllers, the machine control switches. So the first two are option switches. You have a block skip and an optional stop switch. And those have to do with symbols or codes that are programmed into your code and symbols that are programmed into your code. Essentially what these are is if I have a block skip character written into my code, which we'll talk about those things in different segments, if I have those characters in my code and my block skip switch is set to the on position, the controller will ignore or skip those lines of code and will not execute them. If I have those codes programmed in my program, but the block switch is in the off position, the controller will still execute those lines of code. So essentially, it gives you an option to kind of do to execute lines of code or not execute lines of code just based off of the position of this switch. Next to it is an optional stop. So this is a similar type of controller switch. If in my program I have a code written that tells the machine to do an optional stop, the controller will come down to that line of code, it will read the optional stop command, and then it'll check its position, whether either the optional stop switch is on or off. If the switch is on, then the machine will pause. And it'll go into waiting mode and wait for me to acknowledge that I want to continue, either by hitting the start here or start there key. If the optional stop switch is in the off position, then it will blow right on by that and ignore the optional stop and continue to move on. So quite often we program our code down in this shop to have optional stops after every tool change, which will allow you to go in and check, make sure that the previous operation went appropriately, went right. So we usually flip it on, and at every tool change we can stop and check it. Now if you're running multiple parts and you've already gone through and you know that the code, everything's running good, your fixtures are all good, at that point it's a good idea just to flip that off because you know the machine's going to work out fine. So you flip that off and then let it run through all of the program. Okay, next to it we can just toggle on and off our work light. So if I toggle this off, the work light inside the machine goes on and off. Typically we leave it in the on position because that's more helpful to have light. And then finally is our video monitor on and off screen. So I can actually turn off this display just by switching the video off screen right there. Now recognize that does not shut down the controller. The machine is still on, the controller is still active, and if I was running a program, the machine would continue to actually run that program. All it does is basically save life on the CRT monitor. So these are controllers that are from an older age, and there's limited life on the display. So often in a high manufacturing environment where they might be running 24/7, there's no reason to have a displaying stuff if there's not an operator standing there to see it. So that is why that was there, so you could flip that off and save life on your screen. In our application down here in the college, we don't typically do that because we're running, programs that we're very invested in, and we're usually standing here watching them. So that's not something you're normally going to find. But if someone is playing a trick on you and you walk up and the machine's running and there's nothing's going on, just recognize you just flip that on and everything should come right back. Okay, that is your basic overview of the controller. And then from here, we'll step into the next step of setup.